Mein Garten hat a Brunnen mit einem sich gefunden. Alle Schabbes kommt rüber, trinken Wasser dort, mein Liebe.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Radiant Others. I'm your host, Dan Blacksburg, and as always, I'm recording from my basement in West Philadelphia. For the few of you who might not know me, I'm a trombonist and a composer and a teacher who specializes, among other things, in this Jewish klezmer music, this music that has captured the world's attention at various times in the last, say, 40 to 50 years. And before that was the cultural music, although there really wasn't only one culture, of Ashkenazi Jewish people from Eastern Europe, traveling to America, and all around the world. This podcast features conversations between myself and other people who are obsessed with Yiddish music, obsessed with klezmer music. I mean, I used to say that it was people who made important contributions to the Yiddish music world or the klezmer music world, and that's true. That's still true. That's true of our guests today, Isabel Frey and Benjy Fox-Rosen, two awesome people, performers, scholars, and organizers of concerts and more, living in Vienna. Isabel's from Vienna. Benjy is from the States. I met Benjy in New York, as you'll hear in the podcast. And, it's cool to have a duo who's doing a lot of work together, but one of whom I have like a really many, many years long relationship with, and someone else who I'm still getting to know, although this was a really awesome way to get to know Isabel. So, Benjy and Isabel are working, doing a lot of stuff in Vienna and all around Europe and elsewhere. When we talked, I was still vibing off of a concert they had done in Yiddish New York in December of 2023, even though I was talking to them about November 24. So as you'll hear, there's a bunch of stuff that is a little out of date, but so much of what we talk about, I think, is always relevant. And we get to hear a lot about their journey into klezmer music. We get to hear about their work together, especially this cool project they did called Challenging the Theater of Memory, Yiddish Song Beyond Kitsch and Stereotype. And they talk all about what it's like performing Jewish music in a German-speaking world, in a place like Vienna or in other parts of Austria and related places. We also get to talk about Isabel's latest album, Die Fliehende Pave, which was out on Borscht Beat Records last year in October. It's a cool record. You should check it out. And we get to talk about how Isabel and Esther Rochko, another great klezmer player and person of the Yiddish scene from Vienna, have taken over and are doing their own thing with the Klezmor Festival, a festival that's been around for as long as I've been involved in this music and is an important part of the European klezmer world and the global klezmer community. Before we get into the episode, I just want to once again thank everybody who supports us on Patreon.com and who has supported us elsewhere to help make this podcast. I work on this with my producer, Bela Ungar, and while we're so happy with what we get to do and what we get to offer you with these episodes, we'd really love to be able to do more, and so we could really always use more support from you. So you can go to patreon.com/radiantothers. That's patreon.com/radiantothers, and you can pledge some money from us. Just help us offer this resource, these conversations that take you into the backstage hang or the late night hang of what it is to be a performer or even a scholar, or all the places that we mix those two in different ways to make this incredibly beautiful, tight-knit, gorgeously vibrant community that makes up our Yiddish music world. Make sure to check out the links to their music in the show notes and enjoy my conversation with Isabel Frey and Benjy Fox-Rosen.
So, mein lieber geh schon geh, sonnem sagen nein, das sei. Noch ein Jahr, als Gott wird will mir
All right, we're back here with another episode of Radiant Others, and I am so excited to be joined by Isabel Frey and Benjy Fox-Rosen, coming from both Vienna.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, coming from it means different things for each of us, but
Let's just say recording from.
Recording
but that's a good
from
jumping
Vienna.
off point.
But from different parts of the city.
Oh yeah, what's
Yeah.
what do you need to know about the different parts of Vienna?
I mean, Benji's in the historically Jewish district.
Well,
right?
that's expected.
Yeah.
yeah, I couldn't get enough, you know.
And I'm in I don't know, like close to a train station, but actually also historically Jewish district. There was a big synagogue right across the street, basically.
That's cool.
Before it was burned down.
Oh yeah, well, you know.
Mm.
I'm recording from West Philly, which was also a historically Jewish district. Back before white flight in the 50s, Elaine Hoffman Watts grew up about a mile west of where I live. And a lot of the black churches in the neighborhood used to be synagogues. And that's, it's a really interesting story. There's an artist who lives a couple blocks away named Zoe Cohen who did a big project sort of with paper cutting, but then the idea and photos and the idea of this kind of transition between different groups. And so there we go. So much in common already, not just this love and obsession with Yiddish culture and klezmer music, right?
Not only.
Oh, well, so Isabel, you have a new album out. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I was listening to it and I realized that I knew a bunch of these songs from the performance that I saw you two do at Yiddish New York last winter. And it was great because there's something about these songs that even though I'd only heard them I guess this was my second time hearing them, they had already sort of stuck in my mind that I was like, oh, this must be an old folk song that I've heard a million times, and it's cool to hear this new version of it. And I went, I don't think that's old. I think that sounds pretty through composed and modern. And then I just realized that it only took one listen for me to drop into your music and get all caught up in it. So that's very cool. Tell us a little bit about that, and we'll use that as like a jumping off point for all the things.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's exciting. I guess it's kind of the second solo album, and it's really different than the first. And it's the product of the past years and kind of thinking a lot about Yiddish song and kind of its rootedness in different traditions and repertoires, and then also experimenting with new Yiddish song and with setting texts, and which is actually something that I came to Benjy Fox-Rosen to learn this from. At some point I was like, Benjy, can you help me setting, learning how to set music. So actually a lot of the songs I workshopped with Benjy, and so because I've also I think through my experience I started performing more this kind of the revolutionary Yiddish song repertoire, but also just kind of older folk songs. And I felt like a lot of the time there was this audience expectation that everything from Yiddish culture is old. And I tried to break that up already kind of with the revolutionary song repertoire by kind of rewriting or referring to contemporary politics. But so I don't know, discovering also this world of new Yiddish songs and the work of a lot of songwriters also opened up something for me, and it was something that I wanted to also carry to audiences here. And so it just kind of became a bigger focus in thinking about kind of continuity and rupture of Yiddish song, and so that's a bit the theme of the album.
And just remind me the title of the album. I know it's on Borscht Beat Records and it has a peacock on it.
Yeah, it's Die Fliehende Pave. Yeah, I couldn't get rid of the Pave love in Yiddish culture. I was like, do I do another album with a Pave? Yes, I'm just going to do that.
Yeah, why not? Just lay into it. Yeah, I mean, it's what a easy transition because you mentioned visiting Benjy for some ideas around setting Yiddish poetry, and I've had the fortune of performing a ton of your settings of Yiddish poetry or working with you on those, although not recently. But
Yeah, in
it
fact,
did bring me back listening to the album. It brought me back to some of the stuff we had done together.
in fact, Daniel, we did tour in Austria together in 2008.
I remember.
Was that, or 2000 and
No, not 8, maybe 9.
maybe
yeah.
9? Yeah. I think my most distinct memory of that tour was like when we went swimming at a lake outside of Linz, and we couldn't find you for like an hour.
Wait,
And,
really?
Yeah, me and Avi and
Where was I?
Dieter, we were like, "Where is Daniel? What happened to him? Like he doesn't just wander off." And then you came out of the water and you're like, "Where were you? What happened?" And you were like, "Oh, I just swam the whole lake. I just did a lap around the
remember
whole
that.
lake."
I remember that.
We were like,
Yeah, that was a big
"What?
lake. I don't.
What? How did you do that?" And you're like, "I
Those
don't know,
days.
it
Those
just-"
days are behind me.
It was very funny.
That's amazing. I never heard. Yeah, I was like, what context did I vanish? But now I do remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember a concert in sort of a stone pit or amphitheater or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In those. So, okay. So, like, obviously, to listeners can figure out Benjy and I have a pretty distinct idea of where we are on each other's, Yiddish history, Yiddish music history. We met in New York a long time ago, and there was a lot of stuff that happened.
We actually first met in New England
Boston.
Conservatory.
Mhm.
I
That's
was
right.
visiting a good friend of mine who was studying there at the same time as Daniel, and
Same class.
And you were like talking about Bob Brookmeyer, like exclusively. Is that
He
right?
was my teacher. He was
Yeah,
so
yeah.
cool. He was
And-
like 70, in his mid 70s. And he was like, yeah, I thought these, you hear things about jazz musicians like as legends, but he just goes, yeah, when he was a really good cook, or that guy was a jerk, or I really didn't think he was a really great player. And you're like, people revere this person. How can you have this opinion? He's like, well, we used to play to get gigs together, And I'm like, okay, this was a big eye opening for me.
And then I knew you a little bit from New England Conservatory, because I would visit my buddy Noah Kaplan up there. I guess the first couple of years that probably a couple times, 3 to 6 times a year, I would take the Chinatown bus up, and then we met at Kleskamp. I first went to Kleskamp in 2000 and something 6. I don't know.
6 sounds right.
Probably. I think, and you were the first person who taught me a klezmer tune by ear.
No shit.
Yeah.
All right, there we go.
And I was like, what? You can learn this. You can learn this stuff. Like people, you just learn music like that. I was, because it's just so absurd that you would study jazz and not learn huge amounts of repertoire exclusively by ear.
Yeah, that's definitely a subject of another podcast of why.
But that's how it is. And then I got to Kleskamp and you were like, hey, there's this tune. It's like, this isn't so, like, it'd be good on the bass. And when you taught Triske and it was interesting, like, and I still remember that tune, like, very, very nicely.
That's
and
how it
remember
goes.
that room also that we were in, also that was a weird hotel, with a lot of distinctive rooms, no doubt. But that's how we know each other. That's 18 years, my dear.
I know. I'm embracing it. I'm embracing it. That hairline's back. The joints are stiffer. You won't find me swimming all the way across a lake in Austria anymore at the moment. But who knows what the future may hold. But yeah, so and then we played together with Michael Winograd, and we worked on a bunch of records. We worked on his record, Storm Game, and I worked on your record, Sve Velten, and mining a lot of similar aesthetic territory, which I said, like, I also was reminded of some of that stuff listening to your new record, Isabel, especially with the, I really love the duo piece, and then the use of bass clarinet, and then the use of the studio and reverb in the ensemble. And I do want to talk to that
talk about that. So you could feel free to jump in on right there, but also really like, yeah, just as quickly as possible or something, how you came to be focused on Yiddish music as your, I don't say primary, because who was able to make this their primary thing, but a big focus of pillar of your musical life.
Yeah, I really just stumbled into it. I never thought that I was gonna become a musician. I wasn't really planning on that at all. I just, I've been singing my whole life just for fun, and then I randomly heard a few Yiddish songs on like a CD of a friend in a car once, which was the kind of like, it's actually the German Yiddish music revival was that CD. They're called Zupfgeigenhansel, but they have some good Gebirtig songs on there, and Donna Donna, and it was that kind of repertoire. But then also, then I found, Dan Kahn's version of Arbeitslose Marsch and Daloi Polizei. And at the time I was living in Amsterdam, I was super lefty politicized in the squatters movement, trying to find a way to make that palatable to my bourgeois family in Vienna, and finding these very lefty revolutionary songs in Yiddish, and what I also connected with Yiddish at the time a lot was this connection to diaspora, and kind of giving an answer to me of being Jewish, wanting to feel Jewish as a diaspora Jew, but kind of wanting to disengage from a lot of the ethno-nationalism that I had grown up with, and kind of a lot of the focus on Israeli culture. So this was basically how I just explored it, and I really started as a protest singer, in that sense that I just I taught myself a bit of guitar during a kind of a gap year that I did in Israel when I was 18, and so I just accompanied myself a bit on guitar on those Yiddish songs where I didn't really know Yiddish at all, but I played at small protests, like at a small university occupation once, and then at like a climate justice protest, and then I had a first concert in a squat still in Amsterdam, and that's how I slowly started to get into it. And then I moved back to Vienna, and my friend, one of my close friends, was just like, "Why don't you just organize a concert?" And I just organized the concert. Isabel Frey sings Yiddish songs, and that's how it started. And shortly after that, I contacted Benjy and was like, "Can I take lessons with you for Yiddish singing?" And yeah, started taking a lot of other lessons, Yiddish lessons, and a lot of other Yiddish music. Went to Class Canada, yeah. But I really stumbled into it, less from the music side. Let's say it like that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Benjy and I have both come from, conservatory-ish training things, but like at this point in our lives, you can't stay there. I mean, you can, I guess, but I wouldn't know what that's like. So it's so cool to hear that, especially having played on some of those songs you mentioned. But it's both really interesting to me that you just found, you found a sense of connection that you were looking for there. I think this is something I was talking with Sasha Lurie in an episode that we just put out that's really about how, Jewish or not, but in this case, Jewish, we all find our way to this diaspora culture, this vibrant, secular, but more diaspora culture that somehow meets a need that we were looking for as Jewish people, as Jewish individuals, or as individual Jews. I don't know which one, but I know I got into it first because it was sort of connected to the jazziness or the musical worlds that I loved. Specifically for me, it was Jews with Horns, and I was just listening to that in the car with my child and going, wow, this is wild. Still a great record. Benji, when do you remember there being a transition, or if you feel like there was a transition, sort of from somewhere between like, whoa, play cool stuff, to like, whoa, exploring my identity and sense of self and feeling grounded as a human being or as an artist,
I mean,
if that has happened?
I'll speak to that in the way of like, after the first Klez camp in about 2006, I had the feeling that like the New York klezmer community was kind of like, interested young person, like we're gonna snatch him up. And it was that kind of like vacuum like enthusiasm, not vacuum in a negative sense of like we're in an isolation, vacuum, uh, uh, um, rather like here is a Hoover, just like capture this young person and get them into this world. For me, what I think, I can offer is a perspective of like then having moved to Vienna with like being firmly in that culture in New York, in the States, in Brooklyn, and then being in Vienna and being like, what? Like, how does this actually fit into like the other diaspora communities that just don't give a shit about Yiddish culture or diaspora as a end in and of itself, or as an identity in and of itself? And I found that, I've been in Vienna now 11 years. I would say it was very confusing for a while because there's a certain schizophrenic quality to being in this really vibrant international Yiddish cultural scene, right? That is in some ways, I think you would also certainly see in the last year, the institutional politics of mainstream Jewish community is like, you're like, thank God there's this Yiddish cultural world that like accepts people who have a variety of perspectives. And of course, there's tension that comes from that. But, living in Vienna, working for the last 7 years at the official synagogue of the Jewish community, like, I do not take that openness for granted, and I also don't take the sort of the Yiddish or sort of diasporic Jewish community that's self-consciously so for granted. It just, at the same time, it still feels kind of like almost, I don't know if I would say isolating, but I would say it's been a strange experience for me to be on the one hand in the like most mainstream institutional home of Viennese, what it means to do Jewish music in Vienna, which is the Stadttempel, the historical synagogue that has had a choral tradition for 200 years, that has a cantor in robes who wears a funny little hat. No disrespect to the funny little hat. I love the funny little hat on all of
Oh
the
yeah,
on
I
the
believe
classic
it.
cantorial records. Um, like becoming the person who's an expert in that choral repertoire, and at the same time being like, wow, like, this other community is really where I feel at home.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it's there's something about the way that I think we in our scene would even accept that kind of tradition, that it would be not about building a building around it. It would be about sort of like sending it into the field to play around with all the other traditions. And that's like something that you probably don't get when you're working at a job in an institution. But one of the things about our klezmer scene is it's so diffuse. Yes, there are institutions, but it's really just a lot of caring people trying to make a lot of things happen.
Yeah, and
How? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and I think also it's like it's an interesting thing. The strength is community outside of institutionalized settings, like those are the most powerful types of communities, I would say. And we see, of course, as these cultural institutions, cultural movements are like become institutionalized, we see the tensions of that process. Of course things have to become permanent. Of course things have to have a board, and have to have a structure, and have to have the structure of institution to be sustainable. But we see, particularly at this political moment, the cost of such.
Yeah, and it was interesting for me kind of to when I entered into the community, realizing, oh, this is what I've been looking for a very, very long time, and this is what I've been missing. And yeah, and it combines so many different layers of belonging and interest, and it combines it all with a, with a really serious engagement with culture that I don't know, that I just hadn't seen in a growing up in the kind of a bit stifling environment that Benji described. I never worked for the for the community in that way, but I did kind of grow up in it, at least in some marginal way of it also. So yeah, finding this transnational Yiddish music world was also really the sense of coming home, even though it's actually most of the centers are actually far away from my home. But luckily,
Right.
that's not such a that's not such a challenge nowadays. Yeah.
Die Deutschen, sie werden doch Poschedil. Sie wissen nicht, was sie sollen tun.
Sie haben a Tanz, was heißt Schmadril? Einer läuft daher und der andere dahin.
Und die Deutschke, was zimmelt auf dem Schlambil, wird feierdige Knädlich essen. Und als der Rebbe wird auflegen sein Lappe auf ihr, wird sie in Zimbel vergessen.
Nun, es wird noch zelfen, so rech und burech.
Jankev Denil,
Sindel, Grindel, Chaim, Schmiel, Berl, Schmerl, Getzel, Azril, und führen das ganze Kränzel. Kele, Belle, Jentes, was Honne, Bronni, Jagd, was es immer Blimme, Pässe und Rosse, wollen tanzen das Mitzvah-Tänzel. Chiribiribam, biribiribam, chiribiribiribam, chiribiribam, biribiribam, chiribiribiribam, chiribiribam, biribiribam, chiribiribiribam, biribiribam, chiribiribiribam.
Yeah, and you're now invested with some of the responsibility of building that home in Vienna with your work with the Klezmer Festival, right? So we'll get to that. I want to sort of save that a little bit for later. I want to sort of circle back, hopefully like a long circle back to the album and the way that you worked on the music and the sound of the album, because you could have easily just arranged those pieces and just, played them with no treatment. But there's a lot of thought that went into and sort of direction that went into sort of the shaping of individual songs. And, I'm thinking especially of the sense of space and where your voice sits in the mix, and maybe some other instruments at different times. And, but to get through that process, like for both of you, was that how much of your collaboration as a duo sort of set the tone for the album? And then, who kind of, offered those ideas? And then how do you think how did they come through to like feel like we need to do something, or we want to do something to shape these songs further than just notes and rhythms and timbres, of live instruments?
I think the album was also kind of a bit, developed a bit separately from our duo work at first, but then a lot of the songs were maybe the same, and we also sometimes have different arrangements, duo arrangements of songs. And it developed kind of with also, other musicians that I was performing with, but it's kind of with performing with different musicians, then the same repertoire just ends up in different arrangements. A lot of the arranging was actually quite last minute when then also it was going to be a trio album, actually, just me and accordion and clarinet or bass clarinet, but then Benjy also joined, and Zoe Aqua also joined, and then a lot of it was relatively spontaneous. And then a lot of thought went into the mixing. It just kind of took really long also, because I had a lot of other things. I was writing my dissertation also, so there was a lot of time in between the mixing. So yeah, I guess a lot of thought also then went into the post-production and the sound of the voice, and some experimenting with sound also on some tracks. Yeah. But yeah, and I hope at some point we're also going to do a duo album and have our our duo arrangements
you gotta do
also.
it.
Yeah,
It will happen. It
yeah.
will
It's
happen.
I felt like on the album it's a bit like teased, also that the last song is Benji's arrangement of Azur Lang that we sing together. I feel like it's a bit of a teaser for like, yeah.
Yeah. And also Alex Yanilos, who is the did the recording and did the mixing of the record. Yeah, he just plays around. He's just really happy to he knows electronic music and synthesis and delays and all that good stuff, and I think he pushes you towards that a bit.
Yeah,
okay.
he
Well, that's
does. He
good
does.
too.
Yeah,
That's
that's
good
good.
too.
Yeah. No, definitely. He always has really creative ideas, and yeah.
It really brought me back to one of the sessions mixing your record at the bunker so many years ago, Benjy,
my
where
God.
I think they had like a 30-second reverb unit or something like that, and I was like, we're using all of it. Put more reverb on it. Make that guitar note longer.
Yeah, that was a old analog Space Echo.
Oh, great.
A beautiful, huge unit. And Aaron Navizi, who was mixing it, he taught me the basic controls. He's like, yeah, just play around with it. We'll record a couple takes. It's like, oh man, that was
It was good. It really connected those things for me, which is so cool. I mean, I guess when I hear stuff, hints of other kinds of things, whether it's electronic music or, even arrangements or things like that, I always wonder, because for me, I find myself being very deliberate, sometimes intuitively and sometimes not intuitively, about what influences go into which records of mine. So, the Devakis record from a long time ago was extremely influenced by these very specific metal bands or these noisy rock bands. And then the solo record that I'm about to put out, or will probably be out by the time we hear this episode, or we release this episode, is like really about, it's actually also very influenced by that droney stuff and other things. And so, but then even when I made a klezmer record where it was still thinking about this broader spectrum of influence and be like, where are the connections between something within the world, even that might have some experimental bent, like influence from a band like the Klezmatics or Brave Old World, to sort of like connect it out to other things. So were there other maybe like non-Jewish music records or artists or sound worlds that you were thinking about going into this?
Yeah, I think I don't think I was, the like I said, a lot of the arrangements happened spontaneously and kind of within the group, and also a lot with Moritz Weiss and Ivan Trenev, who are the two other musicians who we were gonna do it as a trio record kind of. So a lot of it just happened for gigs in preparation that it worked out. So I don't really know. I'm not really able to trace certain influences. Sometimes I realize maybe in some of my settings or some of the aesthetics that I like, oh, maybe that connects to some music that I like to listen to, kind of indie pop that I like to listen to when I was a teenager or something like that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't really see that I can like trace it or something like that. And especially if I think about my first album was really purely documentary in that I was just kind of wanting to document what I was doing, and then bring out maybe a bit more, but it was not pre-thought out. And for this album it was a bit more thought out and kind of curated, but it's still kind of like the documentation of of the past years. And yeah, I'm interested to hear what influences other people here. I think a lot of also people bring in the influences that they, each individual musician brings in their influence. And like Ivan Trenev, who's the accordionist, brings in a lot of. He's from Macedonia, and he's a fabulous Balkan accordionist also, and he brings that in. And having Zoe on it, I think, is wonderful because also, she brings in also all the Transylvanian influence. So it's nice to see how that converges in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, I know for me, it's definitely a way I think, and I don't expect that of anybody else in terms of how they structure their music or not. But I think one of the things that's interesting about relating it to klezmer music or Yiddish music, and maybe we can even think about how this relates to going back to some of that like sort of tensions or questions that have come up, or maybe the holes that this engaging with this world have filled, is there's so much about I think well, the story that I had early this summer was that I was playing we played a gig, and then there was this Irish trio afterwards, and they were talking about, I just heard this one musician said, "Oh, what's the section that your dad added to this tune?" And then this thing, and it was just, to me, it was so striking because it was such a casual uh, feeling of familiarity and like comfort in tradition and continuity. And you know, I'm not so young, I'm not so old that my experience in Yiddish music, like, we started with nothing, and then we had to excavate it from 78s, and then we had to find the last 3 living people, and then figure out what they have to say. Like, a lot of people have done most of that work for me, and I got these, I learned a lot of stuff on CD and stuff. But I also remember having to make like a million conscious decisions about how I was going to shape my own quote unquote traditional musicianship within Yiddish music, or my own like literacy of a tradition in this music. And I think that that's been true of everybody who chooses to go really deep in this. And so I think about it in terms of, I always want to foreground that sense of conscious choice, because both in the terms of like, A, it's a lot of work, and B, it's a lot of decision making. Like, it's a lot of personal investment. And I think, almost exclusively the people that I end up talking to for this podcast, the people who I think of my peers or people, the reason why we're so deep is because all the reasons that making those choices felt easy. I mean, I know for me that was what it was. Musically, it was so easy to figure out what to do in this music. It was so joyful. It wasn't scary like it has been in some other kinds of music. And maybe that's because it's Jewish music and I'm Jewish. But I think it goes even, I think that's just one way of looking at it. But yeah, I'm just thinking about where you're, what kind of decisions have you, these sort of like conscious decisions that you've been making for your own artistic practice around Yiddish music, or I guess, the opposite of that, when you encountered something that just like blew your world open, that made you have to reconsider everything.
Yeah, I think it was also just a lot of like learning. I mean, I think that was really what was so nice about first entering the Yiddish music world, and taking lessons with Benjy, and then taking lessons with I mean, also just for songwriting, then with Josh Waletsky, or working with Dan Kahn, but also, and then just taking a lot of lessons with people, also just on Yiddish singing, and a deep focus on style, which was really something that I felt like I was really yearning for, or felt immediately into it, and then also exploring it from a more multidisciplinary angle, and going towards instrumental music and dance, and feeling how it all connects. And then at some point there's a certain level of comfort in feeling in making choices, and in feeling like where I'm citing certain things of kind of what was there before, and where I'm taking it into maybe something else. And sometimes that boundary is not really clear, but yeah. So I think it comes from kind of this longer phase of learning and doing while learning. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. How about you, Benjy?
Well, I feel like it's very distinctive from what I'm doing, right? So like being a bass player is a very different thing, and like being a trombone player also, it's like you can sort of fake it if your ears are decent enough. and you can fake it. And for me, the experience of learning klezmer as a bass player was basically like there's nobody else of my generation who played the bass at the time in New York who was interested in playing bass for
That's
klezmer
true.
dancing. So by virtue of that, I just was in situations where I was learning a lot of material. I mean, it was the same thing when I was also playing Hungarian music with Jake. At that time, we were playing for like a Tanzas, I don't know, once a month or something. And I didn't know any of the repertoire. And there was just like, Jake was like, you're the guy to do it. Just like figure it out.
The vacuum cleaner is on.
Exactly. And like, I think that experience was for me something that just sort of happened naturally as a sort of like, you're a musician, you get called for gigs, whatever. That's how it works. But then the experience of Yiddish, learning to sing in Yiddish, which was for me actually learning to sing as a soloist,
Right.
and learning Yiddish, and then learning to sing as a soloist in Yiddish. Like these were actually three distinct processes. I mean, like the language acquisition was its own thing, and which involves, of course, a lot of like scholarship in a very serious way, and in a very specific linguistic way. And wrote, language learning, which I love, and language classes and such. But then the singing was like, yeah, a lot of classes at Klez Camp for repertoire. But for me, it was also like listening to recordings of older singers. Like for me, Menashe Oppenheim, wonderful singer from Łódź, who was in Warsaw in the Yiddish theater, emigrated to New York in 1939, played in a number of Yiddish films in Poland, then was at Yiddish theater, and then like Borscht Belt entertainer and singer. Like his vocal style for me, like that was it. I like stole as much as I could possibly from him. He has this beautiful, warm kind of tenor, a little bit higher than me. Beautiful sound, really shit recordings. Lauren Sklamberg introduced me to Menashe Oppenheim, and Lauren will be like, "Oh, they're all on Ash records, and they're on such cheap shellac, it just degrades." And so, unfortunately, the quality of the recordings most of them isn't so good. He recorded, I think, 16 songs, maybe and a couple of other songs in film. So for me, that was really huge vocally to hear a timbre that I was like, whoa, my voice almost can sort of like fake that. For hearing like other Yiddish singers like Lebedev or Moshe Oisher, those were voices where I was like, nah, that's not even close to to my instrument. It's like I can't really fake. I love the repertoire. I love.
Oh yeah.
But it's a very different thing in terms of like how does the timbre of this singer from an archive, from a recording, match my own possibilities. And for me, then also like getting into the unaccompanied Yiddish song repertoire, which I did on my own quite a bit, and then with Josh Waletsky, I had this grant with the New York State Council of the Arts, apprentice something grant that a number of people have had. I was the first one in a long line of Yiddish singers to have that with Josh, and it was really a very instructive process, and got me also sort of very deep into the close listening of these unaccompanied songs, which is something that Isabel has also spent a lot of time doing. I mean, that's also something that when Isabel came to me and was like, "Hey, I want to sing in Yiddish," I was like, "Do you know about this stuff? Because this is like the DNA of Yiddish music." Now I would say it's the DNA of a very specific vernacular style of Yiddish music, which is very distinct, related to, but distinct from what professional singers did, but very much overlapping. And I think then for somebody like me, or also somebody like Isabel, who doesn't have this like huge vocal training, right? Then the type of timbre that you can identify with, and also that you can identify with like emotionally, like for me, hearing operatic voices like Sidor Belarski is a major turnoff. Like I love Belarski, I love some of his songs, but there's something about that vocal quality that to me, I don't, the warmth of of that type of voice is very different and a little, I would just say, simply less Hamish. And also,
Yeah.
when you're listening to Yiddish music as a Yiddish singer, you're always listening for what to steal, So so you kind of, for me at least, I find myself attracted to voices that can that I hear some kind of a quality that I can imitate in some ways.
Yeah, I definitely connect to that also because I think it also comes from this, coming to singing not from any training. And I've always had, like, I had a phase when I had some classical singing lessons or sang in choirs or had some kind of more popular singing lessons, but I never, tried to fit my voice into some kind of stylistic framework other than what just felt just kind of natural the way I sang it. And then hearing a lot of those the field recordings that really Benjy introduced me first to, and then once I came to Class Canada and just joined for a class with Ethel Rame and kind of saw how that was being circulated and treasured, it really also grasped me. And it was also it was definitely this timbral identification and the kind the the lightness with which people were just kind of singing and then having all these intricacies in style that just had this very beautiful flow to it, that I felt very attracted to. And then also, I think what immediately attracted me was the seriousness with which people were treating this repertoire and listening to it, and where a lot of it is connected to this question of how to deal with rupture, which I feel like the klezmer, like the instrumental klezmer revival, has its own way of having dealt with that, and with song it's a bit different. And I feel like a lot of the connection to kind of non-professional field recordings and singers on field recordings, and the questions of how to bring that into artistic performance today, that's really fascinating. And I felt like it was happening at least around me with a lot of also people from a musical generations above me, but also in my generation. And that became basically the focus of my dissertation research, without knowing. I mean, then I was starting a PhD research, and then I realized that it brought me closer and closer to that, because I was thinking about the voice in Yiddish song and folk song, and what does folk song mean, and who is the folk, and it brought me back always to this repertoire, a lot of which was collected as folk song. So aesthetically, it's definitely connected to all these questions of belonging. But yeah, also stylistically, I felt like it's something that it does something to listen to a lot of those recordings. It's a kind of like artificial immersion in a in a Yiddish speaking kind of vernacular context, and that does something to also change the way. That I felt like that it changed how I sing, and it changed my voice, and how I approach song.
Yeah, I think that when you're dealing with rupture, you take what you can get, and an artificial immersion, like you said, that's a great phrase. That's what one of the things we have, and I think that goes along. And I just want to say, both of you just, if I can pat my own back, illustrated the point of like that level of choice, that level of focus, really amazingly, like how you could find 16 songs, an artist who has 16 tracks out there, and say, this is what I'm going to deal with, and I'm going to take this as a pillar of my style. Like, no one's telling you to do that. There's no cultural, like, there's no community context or professional need to do that. It's just something that you found your way to. And the same that you're saying about this, like, I mean, even the whole unaccompanied song tradition. And if people want to know where to find that, I'd say the two best places to start are the Ruth Rubin Archive at YIVO, which is online, and then the Yiddish Song of the Week blog, which is also all online, and it has like an unbelievably generous amount of information about each song. But yeah, and I also really appreciated that you drew the distinction between the klezmer instrumental tradition, which, as far as I understand, really was and has always sort of remained this professional tradition. And so you have, for me, my bread and butter is commercial recordings, right? And, your bread and butter is ethnographic field recordings or, archival recordings. And yeah, I mean, and obviously you said you do your dissertation on it, but I think that so many of us in this world have like so many thoughts about all of this kind of stuff. But yeah, if you just want to say, I would love to hear a little bit more about this idea of folk and rupture and folk music and who are the people and what does that even all mean and what does that mean for us as people trying to figure or grapple with these questions or whatever. Just a little question.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really, it's interesting because the notion of folk song, it's reactionary in a lot of ways. It comes from like a romantic nationalist thought and like European German romantic nationalism, and it's very much it's the notion of Yiddish folk song is really closely tied to modernity and one certain answer to the Jewish question, which maybe Saul Noam Zeret, Yiddish scholar, would call like normalization, the normalization approach of Yiddish culture to kind of belong also to this European family of folk cultures and to have its own folk tradition. So I think there's a lot of baggage in the way a lot of those songs were collected. I mean, now I'm speaking more about like the early 20th century, like Ansky expedition and the Joel Engel and also the interwar Poland collections, and a lot of those audio recordings are not necessarily available or in circulation, only very limited. What today is more available is the post-war, the early post-war North American recordings, the Ruth Rubin archive, the Yiddish Song of the Week blog. But those were collected in the similar, as part of a longer history of folk song collection. So I think it's part of the residue. It's kind of part of the afterlife of these archives. And so it's interesting that then we have this Yiddish music community, as we were talking before, that actually has a very critical stance towards national belonging, and has this kind of a lot of the like rediscovery and revaluation of the diaspora. And breaks open a lot of the categories of kind of ethno-nationalist identification, but also queers it a lot. And so you have this more kind of this normalizing kind of more reactionary concept of folk song in this very different context. And I think it's tied to the way in which if we compare what is happening in the Yiddish music community and the way in which these questions of how to approach rupture and continuity and how to deal with it creatively in the present are negotiated. I do think it is in some ways, not always, but in some ways it is it's special the way it happens in the Yiddish music community as compared to other music traditions where there is more of like a nationalist motivation to establish kind of a single tradition that is, authentic or pure or something like that. So I feel like a lot of the things are just negotiated in a very different way, and the rupture is embraced often rather than trying to hide it, or the transculturalism is embraced. So there are things that I find really interesting, theoretically from an ethnomusicological perspective, that I feel like, I want to, carry out into the world and let people know about, that this is what is happening in our small bubble that to let people know about it. And that is also just, I think, theoretically says a lot, because in some ways the Yiddish music scene is special, and in other ways it's not. And the rupture is actually something any music tradition in today needs to deal with in some way or another, and kind of ruptures through modernity and technological development and the loss of vernacular music culture, whatever that means in different contexts. But that's a more common phenomenon. So yeah, for me, thinking a lot about post-vernacularity in relation to folk song, it just really made a lot of sense. and I think it says a lot also to these other contexts.
I think it does. And that's really, I like being challenged on this idea of, what were people's political goals or political ideas that were behind some of the work that I would say is invaluable to us, even if our politics or our and I don't mean politics and like which candidate we support, but our like way of thinking about groups of people and organizing them in the world, in this world that we live in and share, how those relate to each other. I want to say, like, bring this back, like, if you're listening and you're a Yiddish music performer or you're a klezmer musician or you're something, this stuff is not abstract. This stuff really has real effects on how we shape our music, and whether, to me, and I'm going to sound maybe a little haughty here, but whether our music has a depth, is accessing the depth of expression that is available to us in our vernacular music, our diaspora culture, and again, we might be ahead of the curve on this dealing with rupture thing, maybe a little bit, I don't know, but there are other diaspora musics that have a lot more continuity, even if there's a lot of pain in those people's past. And I think that it's something that you get to play around with, but you have to like suck it all in. You have to try to digest all this, as much of the information from the songs themselves, from the music itself, that will kind of, like, when we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about like turns of phrase from, specific singers on a specific page on a Yiddish Song of the Week blog, that where maybe I wasn't able to articulate all these questions clearly, but just listening to these people sing, coming from my own background as an East Coast Jew, having grown up in a modern, mainstream, middle-of-the-road, conservative-ish synagogue, it's all like the way that I bounce off of that has all of this stuff, these ideas and these so-called theoretical ideas totally bound up within it. And it feels very visceral to me. And I want to invite everybody who's listening to like listen to our music, listen to the old music, and try to like open yourself up to that viscerality, that like just like intensity of feeling it. Like we're feeling it, Okay, so one of the things you wrote me about when we were discussing this podcast, you said you wanted to talk about your artistic research project, or I actually forgot the word project, so I was just really interested to talk about artistic research on Yiddish music in a German-speaking context in general. But if you have a specific project that you're working towards, you can be as general or specific as you want, and it sounds like this is something you're doing together. And so I really want to hear about artistic research on Yiddish music in a German-speaking context. Tell me about it.
All right, so I could start you off with like what artistic research is as an academic field, but maybe that's completely not interesting for any of the
I think maybe it's interesting. No,
maybe it's interesting.
Touch on it, because we were just trying to really connect academic research to like performance practice.
It's an interesting thing. Like this term artistic research, I would say half of the people who do it or get grants doing it or whatever will say, it's kind of bullshit. It grew out of basically fine art academies and conservatories beginning to grant PhDs and developing PhD programs about 20 years ago. That's sense. What half the people say. I would say maybe less than half, or the half that's like, I don't want to talk about it too loudly because might not be good. And then there are a lot of people who say artistic research is an emerging field that breaks down some of the boundaries of scholarly research by considering art making and the processes surrounding art making as embodied forms of knowledge and as different ways of creating knowledge that can be communicated in not just the traditional forms of scholarly communication being text. So we have these two sort of
Sounds very familiar
two
to
poles,
like
right?
going to a Yiddish music festival.
Right. So we have these two poles, and Isabel and I were created this lecture concert. When did we debut it, Isabel?
Yeah,
2
it
years
was
ago now?
it was 2022, and it was definitely it was a lecture concert. You know, the idea was first to just do a lecture concert on with Yiddish music, which is a task which could be very simple. I don't know. I talk a lot before I sing something. Benji can also talk well, and but then it was my advisor, and actually also Benji's advisor, who's a ethnomusicologist who's worked a lot in the field of music and minority research, and she's really done kind of pioneering work on that, and she was basically
Ursula Hemetek is her
saying,
name.
yeah, Ursula Hemetek, and she was basically saying, okay, if you do this lecture concert, you know, it needs to be like political, it needs to be, you know, subversive somehow. So that's kind of how we started coming up with a project, a lecture concert that was kind of questioning Yiddish song and expectations of audiences, mostly also in the context of kind of the German-speaking world. That was the idea, and we called it "Challenging the Theater of Memory: Yiddish Song Beyond Kitsch and Stereotype." And so, in the process of preparing this lecture concert, which was really a lot of work, and was already a process of research and kind of writing a paper that was also a dialogue, and then also had music
a performance
pieces,
and not
and then a
two.
performance in
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So this was really this was already kind of this process, and then it was suggested to us to turn it into an artistic research, kind of a pilot research project, and that's basically what
Yeah,
we
and
did.
we at that time didn't really know what that field was,
Yeah,
artistic
yeah.
research. So
I see.
and so that's been kind of a new a learning curve, I would say. But and now we're in the midst of writing another application for a larger project, which I don't want to talk about. Poo poo poo. We shouldn't, you know, the
Yeah.
horrible, you know, the
Yeah, you don't want to jinx it.
spirits
That's
should
totally
stay away.
fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
You know, this doesn't need to be the big reveal
No, no.
podcast, but
but I'll talk maybe a little more in detail about the lecture concert itself, because I think it might be interesting for listeners to sort of hear about like the challenges that we have uh, living and working in the German speaking world as Yiddish
Yeah.
singers, right?
yeah.
So we begin the lecture concert with a medley of all of the forbidden fruit of Yiddish songs, like when you're in the klezmer world, like are we really? You really want to play Offen Perpechik? Like, wait, Rosenkes mit Mandlin? Are you serious? Kinderjahren also? Like, we don't do Tumba. I don't play Tumba Lalaika. Like, the only thing we didn't do was tradition. Wait, didn't we add fiddler tradition from fiddler?
We
for
did
one
add
gig?
it.
Also,
We
yeah.
added for one gig. Yeah, we added
Yeah,
it
we-
for one
we
gig.
added-
classic.
And Hava Nagila, obviously.
And Hava Nagila also,
yeah, yeah,
Obviously.
yeah.
So it's
The
like we
classic.
wanted to basically to be like, okay, what is the average like Jewish music audience member in Germany and Austria? What do they know? What do they expect to hear? What do they have access to? What do they know? You know, so we start by playing this repertoire, and then we begin with you know, asking the questions of the audience, like, where do you know this stuff from? Like, do you know Offen Pripyat from Schindler's List, from the scene when the ghetto is liquidated? You know,
Mm.
because it's sung by a children's choir in the background. Maybe you know Hava Nagila from the Berry Sisters, or maybe you know Giora Feidman's recording of Rosenkes mit Mandlin, or you know, and we sort of ask like, why is this the starting point for this culture within this culture, right? And then we sort of pose the question, well, like, if this is the nostalgic starting point, you know, which is actually, these songs are actually the product of modernity and a nostalgia for the tremendous economic cultural changes going into the 20th century of industrialization, of assimilation and such. And these nostalgic songs, they've been nostalgic for a while. And then we sort of ask the question, well, what does, if this isn't it, if this isn't the holy grail of Yiddish music, then what is it? And so then we introduce in the second section, I would say something like the soundscape of Yiddish music as we know it from these recordings, primarily Ruth Rubin recordings. Like, what does a Yiddish singer sound like? What do Yiddish songs sound like when we're not in this sort of theatrical context? And then for the third section, we reflect on this request that we had. Do you want to talk about it, Isa?
Yeah, I mean, this was a request for the opening of the Jewish Film Festival, which happens every year in Vienna, and so we were both asked to perform there. And the theme of the festival that year, it was 2021, was Trotzdem, which is German for in spite of, and the theme music also for the film trailer, kind of the trailer for the whole film festival, was Mir leben ewig, the song also that was written in the ghetto and yeah, is like often this kind of triumphant song today, triumphant Yiddish song today, and which I had actually, come to Benjy at some point being like, I want to learn this song. And Benjy was like, why do you want to learn this song? That's a terrible song. So we were working through that a bit. And through that song, also reflecting on this question of resistance, this kind of polarity between victimhood and resistance. So I had come at it kind of more from being attracted to a lot of the resistance repertoire, because I had grown up with a lot of Holocaust education in Austria that was exclusively focused on the kind of the story of victimhood and like the ultimate victim, Jews, the ultimate victim, and it comes down to the point that people don't, people in Austria don't want to laugh about anything, and they don't want to laugh about a Jewish joke or something, because anything that is connected to Jewish culture is serious and sad and Holocaust. Basically, that's like
it's very awkward to watch movies with Jewish humor.
Yeah.
And be the only one in the movie theater laughing. And you're like, oh God, I'm an anti-Semite? Oh no.
So it was kind of connected. So I found a lot of it, in the resistance repertoire, to at least telling another story to people that like, oh, there was also Jewish resistance and partisans, and that also happened. But then it's also, sometimes it's not so easy, even with this repertoire, to still feed into maybe nationalist romanticization or also generally kind of hegemonic memory narratives. And so in that third section, we really deal with this question: what do we do with this Shoah repertoire that whether it's resistance songs or mourning songs, or how to deal with the Shoah in performance in Germany and Austria. I mean, and in a way, it's always there. It's always there in relation to audience, also the audience expectations, and yeah. So that was kind of the question. And then in the end, we have a fourth section, which is more just kind of exploring a bit on what we talked before, creative ways of approaching Yiddish song through creating new Yiddish song and setting texts and adapting old texts. And we end with the only version of Mir leben ewig that Benjy wrote for himself to be able to do Mir leben ewig. If you want to talk about that.
So
I sort of move.
Well, yeah, I sort of wrote I just changed the syntax of the word. So instead of mir leben ewig, it's leben mir ewig. So it brings it sort of into this question. That song, which was written in the Vilna ghetto and performed in the cabaret there, and sort of the legend of it is that it was performed in the cabaret in front of, the SS officers who would be in the cabaret, and the text of the song is, we live forever despite our enemies, despite our foes, in every hour we will endure. And,
Yeah.
I think, I could talk about first off, the different translations that you find of this text are very fascinating, because in the Israeli version, the red-bound Yiddish books that were the translations, or not the translations, but that were edited by Kovner, Abba Kovner, the resistance fighter,
we used to,
terrorist,
I remember him.
Israeli national hero, poet, very complex, interesting, extremely controversial figure.
Yeah. We used to perform a song about him at every Dan Con concert in Germany.
Exactly.
It was a moment. I was just thinking about that from what you were saying.
And Kovner, and in that book, it doesn't say we are eternal. It says we are an eternal people, right? And it's a very interesting thing. It doesn't say. So the interesting thing about the song is that it doesn't define who the Wir is. Mir, sorry, that's German. My Yiddish is a little bit German these days. Es tut mir leid. And
we forgive you.
And it says mir leben ewig. And the interesting thing about the song is the we is not defined, right? Is the we, and this is what I think is the most interesting, is the we the people in the cabaret who are pretty much all exterminated, because there is no continuity, if that is, right? Or is the we the Yiddish speaking vernacular culture, which there's also no continuity. I mean, post vernacular culture is something very different. I wouldn't call that continuity in the same way that perhaps the people would have imagined it. Or is the we just simply that this song is sung? I mean, and it's sung in this sort of triumphant way often in concerts. Like, it's interesting. And my problem with it is sort of like, there's really no, like, is survival in and of itself worth celebrating in a joyful way? Like, like the destruction of a civilization, like genocide is genocide. And then I don't know if we're going to, do you celebrate on the other side? That's not really appropriate,
It's interesting. It reminds me of something I always feel when someone has a close loved one, especially like a parent who passes away. And I think that there's this, on an individual level, every reaction, I always say every reaction is allowed. And on a social or communal, or I guess in some cases, like, a national level, like, responsibilities remain, towards humanity and like, living people. But I do think that, like, yes and is always the answer to this question. But
exactly.
it just it reminds me, I mean, it goes back to this idea of like, what is behind these songs are not just songs. They are expressions of human beings with a lot of baggage, because we're human beings. And
I think that, like, this position of ambiguity, or is it permitted to be joyful about these things? I think it's an extremely profitable position to make art from. Like, it's extremely productive.
Yes.
These very, very complex questions. And it makes me think of, there's this video piece, the artist, I don't remember, she visits Auschwitz with her survivor grandfather, and they play I Will Survive, the bar mitzvah hit.
Dancing Auschwitz.
Dancing Auschwitz.
Dancing Auschwitz by Jane Corman.
Yeah, by Jane Corman, and literally her grandfather dances on the gate of Auschwitz, and it was shown in Vienna several years ago, and people were furious about it. And you're like, but this is a survivor, an individual who survived this genocide, choosing to celebrate in this way, and I think it's very interesting, and and there are a lot of artworks, of course, that address this sort of question of memorialization, survival, victimhood, celebration, like, so anyway, in to bring it back then to my own setting, I try to just bring the discomfort of this position to the front in the setting. And I think this question of, we're still here, but we're not actually still here, or we are still here, but, or of course Yiddish music is thriving, but like, I don't really like, look at me, like I'm a supposed expert of, a lot of this stuff and a lot of context. Like, I'm not the greatest Yiddishist. I'm not the greatest singer. I don't, like,
No, I totally know what you mean.
I wouldn't have passed if I were in the vernacular culture. Like,
I wonder that about myself sometimes.
Wir leben, baby, es brennt auf Welt. Wir leben, baby, ohne Groschen Geld. Und auf Zepiken nicht die alles Sonnim, was willen uns verschwarzen unser Ponym. Wir leben, baby, wir seinen do. Wir leben, baby, in jeder Show. Wir wollen leben und erleben schlechte Zeiten überleben. Wir leben, baby, wir seinen do. Leben wir ewig.
Es brennt a Welt.
Leben wir ewig. Ohne Groschen Geld. Must we survive the shaming of our captors only to spite them for forever after? Leben wir ewig, who is still here? Leben wir ewig, in hours of fear. Must we survive this degradation to emerge a sacred nation? Leben wir ewig, leben wir ewig. Wer sei noch da?
I think I do think it's interesting, with like that's a funny question, but also kind of a silly, like a good question. Like I think klezmer music and instrumental stuff is one thing, but I do think that it's a lot harder because Yiddish song is just so it's like Yiddish literature. It brings so much with it. It's like, oh, we have to know the entire Torah, and then you'll get half the references that are in this song. If you went to Cheder and you know all of the references, and it's just. But I always say this about even klezmer music melodies. They are very. A lot happens in a short period of time. It's a very information dense music. It's why, even the idea of like, Hasidic nigunim is this thing that you repeat over and over again to go into a trance. It's like, you look at other trance musics, okay, the loop is like is very short.
Yeah, exactly.
And you look at a Hasidic nigun,
it's not like 8 sections.
it's not like 8 sections. It's not a 24
with the text in Aramaic and then in Yiddish.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
it's a very different approach to, I would say, like, density of material in art, or in that case, like the idea of sort of like spiritual transcendence being a very different experience than something where it's like something that's like 4 or 8 seconds long that can loop over and over again, which of course, no shade. It's just like, if you're going to grapple with this stuff, it's worth understanding what you're getting yourself into. Well, that's all really great. And I hope maybe we can get a clip of, if you have a recording of that, we get a clip of it and share it at that moment. So, okay. I think that it's probably time to start moving towards wrapping up. I definitely want to, we've got some ideas that you have some artistic projects on the horizon, and we're really going to eagerly await your artistic research as it comes together. if we had more time, I'd love to hear about, like, I think to me it's about transformation. It's about transforming yourself, transforming your audience. It's about like coming out of, I think that sounds like a really wonderful endeavor. And the goal to me would be that something has like, and transformation, like fermentation, not like magic, which is, I know, Benjy, something that's a transformation that you've been well acquainted with
That's right.
in the past.
That's right. In the depths of my refrigerator.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad.
And
it's
I have
still
some
going
kimchi fermenting right now as we speak.
Yes, that's so good. We
Mm.
just buy it from H Mart, which is a wonderful experience. But yeah, so who knows if that'll make it in. Anyway, so one of the coolest new things that I just recently found out about is that you, Isabel, and Esther Rochko are taking the lead on the Klezmore Fest that has been around for quite a long time. And you got a festival coming up. This episode will come out after it happens, but that's life. And what's it been like now being thrust into a position of so-called power? We know that there are many caveats to that, which we don't have to, and that you're really still just one of us. But what's it like having the responsibility of putting together a Yiddish music festival, or whatever even you consider that at this point, and then what does it feel like to take on the responsibility of continuing this particular festival?
Yeah, it's a lot, and I'm still, I think, finding my way. Very curious now how this first festival will go, or well, I don't know if I should say that right now. But I think with like the first festival, we're gonna learn how we're learning how things are going. But definitely a lot went in already in trying to think of how to take over a festival that has been around in Vienna for 20 years, and really also has been successful in kind of establishing itself as one of the international Jewish music festivals, and brings in through a lot of also international artists, and is also known within the Yiddish music community, and also at the same time has like a whole kind of pool of local artists that it has kind of pushed through that, me including, actually. I mean, I was also really pushed through the festival, and then at the same time it's been a bit, I think my task also as someone who's also Jewish from Vienna has been to think about how to connect it more to existing Jewish life in Vienna, or maybe to connect it more to also themes that go beyond, or formats that go beyond a concert evening, and thinking about new formats, and thinking about connecting to other spaces. And I mean, it's also simple things like having a Shabbos evening at Jung Yiddish, at the new kind of Yiddish cultural center in Vienna, and having a clubbing night with Kleztronica, which Chaya will be there, and we will have Kleztronica meets Oriental Techno, which is an artist, Kurdish Austrian artist, Seba Kayan, who does something very similar to Kaya. So things like that, trying to think of new formats, and trying to bring in also. I mean, a lot of the, I'm so deeply involved in kind of academic, scholarly work, that a lot of how I think also then about festival curation and writing program texts and stuff. It's all very brainy and theoretical, but I think that works really well, and especially for a festival. And it comes down to the also the questions of how to deal with what we talked about before, memory culture, because it's always been, the festival always takes place in November. And it's always around November 9th. And I hated that there was just like a normal concert on November 9th, which is the year, like the annual day of commemoration of the November pogrom, what is also referred to as Kristallnacht. And so so at least, for this year, we had like a panel discussion and a concert plus a panel discussion and trying to reflect on that. But it's also, a challenge of having then a Yiddish music festival in Vienna that is not also on November 9th, that is not all just about the Holocaust and feeding into the theater of memory, as we call it. So
it's kind of astounding, like the history of like these festivals in Vienna. It used to be that the Yiddish Culture Festival, which was from the Jewish community itself, the Jewish Film Festival, and the Klezmer Festival were all in November, sometimes with overlapping events, all because of the November pogrom, because of Kristallnacht.
Because they wanted to, we got a good date for this.
Because this is great. Like the month you do things that are Jewish. I mean, this is, the other festivals have moved their calendars, but they were all, I mean, 10 years ago when I moved to Vienna, they were overlapping, and the closing event of one would be the starting event of the other. I mean, and they never worked with each other.
That's that. Well, there's always the shul you go to, and then the other shul Yeah. But no, that sounds great, and I can tell you from looking at the lineup that I can see, the experience, both of your experience already shining through in the work that you've already presented, like in the work in the festival you've already created, and best of luck, and obviously we'll see. This episode will appear on the other side, so people will have. I mean, if hopefully people who are there will listen to it and hear about this, but it's congratulations, mazels, and I look forward to seeing you all develop into your roles and have a lot of fun. I hope.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely fun. Esther and I are having fun. We like being in power, even if it's just a small
that's
power.
What I'm talking about. It's a lot of good power. It's a lot of good power. You got anything that people need to know about Benjy?
Well, I have some projects that I've been experimenting with the Fortunoff Archive of Holocaust Testimony.
Yeah.
Which you spoke to Stephen and Zisel, which is I have a sort of much more experimental project working with. I plan to work with initially just with audio from those archives, but found actually just the video of these people just incredibly beautiful.
Great.
So that's slowly developing into kind of video installation piece, which is something new for me.
Super cool.
I'm not sure what exactly what's gonna be with that in the end, but it's pretty interesting, and so it's interesting. I mean, I haven't put out my own record for quite some time, and it's something I sort of have plans vaguely to do, along with like wiping the ass
You've
of my
had a
3
job
children.
and a family. I was gonna say, I was like, you have a job and a family, and now that I'm a parent, I let's just say I have a deeper understanding of some part of that.
Yeah, but I'm also, I ended this chapter as the choir director at the Stadttempel, which I was doing for 7 years. And I'm just, now I have a different job at the Music and Minorities Research Center, doing ethnomusicological research, and basically a project where I get to read a lot and listen to archival recordings of all sorts of different minorities. And it's wonderful. Right now, I have not so much pressure. I'm in an exploratory, read a lot of material phase. But I'm really enjoying also the transition to using my scholar. I used to do the scholarly stuff on the side. I wrote my master's a couple years ago. And now it's sort of the flip that like my day job will be doing the scholarly stuff, and now the musician stuff happens on the other hours. But I'm also just like, wow, I think I will have more energy for my family and my life and my creative life. And yeah.
Hell yeah. It's a juggling act for sure. We'll talk about that some other time, but I just want to say thank you for coming for hanging, for talking. It's so great to get to know you a little better, Isabel, and to get back into it with Benjy, and to talk about new and old music, because that's what we're into, and to get a really clear picture, a clearer picture of what life is like for you as artists, where you are. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. So nice.
Also lang, sagen mir sich sei gesund. Schein kenat von ersten Begegnen.
Sie ist die Sonne aufgegangen mit ihr ganzen Zerfall. Und die Schatten von unser Gesegnet. Sei gesund, sei
Well, that was my conversation with Isabel Frey and Benjy Fox-Rosen. I really loved getting to talk to them about their work, about their music, about themselves. I think when they were talking about artistic research as this place where we have different ways of producing and sharing knowledge rather than just text or experiments or things like that. The work that we do as what they used to call at my conservatory, New England Conservatory, artists, teachers, scholars, the work that we do is that. Like, we are just in it as for ourselves, we're in it for each other, and we're in it for all of you. We're in it to create not just music, not just artwork that's the expression of our individuality, but is actually something that helps bring people together and give people a foundation for who they are, something to stand on, something concrete. These songs, these explorations of these songs, the way that we perform them, the way that these recordings of old singers sound, this is real stuff that you can hold. I mean, if you're Jewish, if you're not Jewish, but that this music calls to you, this is real stuff that is part of something that was really big. It was the way that people lived. This is part of the way that people lived, and it's still a part of the way we live. Like Benjy says about post-vernacularity, it's changed a lot, but it's now a new part of the way we live, and the greatest part about being human is that we can keep changing. I don't know if anybody's been checking out some Octavia Butler books, but there's this great book called Parable of the Sower that has some eerie and upsetting parallels to today's world, but in it, they talk about the only constant in life is change. And I think that that's just something that we get to use. Change doesn't mean throwing everything out. Change means that we get to use everything that we can find to constantly reinterpret and repurpose or create from in order to keep pushing our world, ourselves, our communities in the direction that we want, in the way where, for me, we make room for everybody to be fully themselves, able to take on the responsibilities that are theirs for themselves and their fellow people, and able to play and keep playing throughout our lives. That's what I want for all of us, whether I know you or not. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're inspired, please drop us a line, give us some money. We won't say no. And just keep playing some klezmer music. Check out Yiddish Songs of the Week blog. That was a big resource for everybody here. And have a good Shabbos.
Fliehen der Reges weg von ein Tag. Während
Und sie sehen gar plötzlich schon Jahren. Und wir stehen noch als ungesegnen sich. Хоть es dacht sich schon spätlich geworden.
sei gesund, Zeit zu gehen, muss man gehen. 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 Sei gesund. zu gehen.